Being a chartered manager means that you are a specialist in that area, and it means you've got all the skills to do the job to the best of its ability.
You are seen as a leader, a true leader who has credentials behind the great work you've already been doing.
It's enhanced my understanding, it's enhanced my skill set, it's improved my mindset.
It makes all the difference.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Hello, am I live? Yes. Amazing. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and welcome to those who've joined us online to tonight's Leadership Lounge. Tonight, I am absolutely thrilled to have with us Matt Brittin. He will be known to many of you from his time at Google, where he ran Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He started at Google, I think, in 2007.
2007.
And then quickly rose up to then run the UK and then run Europe. And just stepped down very recently.
Earlier this year.
Earlier this year. So he's taking a gap year. If you want to ask him what he's doing with his gap year, please do. But before Google, he spent time at McKinsey, at Trinity Mirror, at London Business School, where he did an MBA. And he was a rower.
Yeah.
And did you win a medal?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Never a gold one. Never a gold one.
Never a gold one, but he did represent Europe in the Olympics.
Britain.
Britain, sorry, yes. No, Europe for Google, Britain for rowing. Thank you. So anyway, we have a lot of very interesting questions to ask, but we will have time for audience questions. So we're going to take about 20 minutes at the end for those, and also from those of us online, you'll also be asked your questions, and Mike Bolt, one of our events team folks who's producing this evening, will be reading out those questions. So please do think about what you'd like to ask Matt. But let me start with the potted history of your career. Give us the highlights, maybe a low light or two if there was one. But share with us.
Wow. Well, look, first, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for coming or tuning in. I really appreciate it. I feel like very humbled to be in this institution talking about careers in management. Where to start? I remember at business school, you can tell a story two ways. You can sort of tell it from the beginning forward with all the randomness, or you can tell it from the end backwards. So tell it from the end backwards, I wanted to work in technology that was going to change the world, and to do that I needed to kind of understand business and advertising and media and strategy. And so, that's why I worked in newspapers and in McKinsey doing some consulting. I went to business school and needed to know how to do deals, and that's why I worked in real estate. But actually what happened was I had no idea what I wanted to do. I only went to university because I turned out, I was terrible at, let's start here, I was terrible at sport. And my mum was a county netball player, and my father had trials for Arsenal and Chelsea at football. And my parents are amazing, but their one bit of parenting that I think they let themselves down on was laughing at me when I kicked a ball or tried to catch. And so I was terrible. And then I found the sport of rowing. And it's brilliant for those people who are uncoordinated because they tell you exactly how to move. And you also have to move with other people. And so it turns out that being a gangly, long-armed person, long-legged person is an advantage. And I ended up being quite good at rowing as a result of that, going to a good university as a result of that, looking for a job where they were prepared to let me go training. In those days, there was no kind of lottery funding for sport in the UK. And so I went into real estate because they love sports people at real estate. It's all run by men who love rugby players. And I could convince them that I wasn't a rugby player, but it was nearly as good and I might get into the Olympic team. And I used to go rowing in the morning, go into the office, eat an enormous breakfast, go into the toilet and have a little nap in the middle of the day, and then go training in the evening. So that was real estate. And at some point I figured out that I wasn't going to get an Olympic gold medal, and I also didn't want to work in real estate, so I was terrible at it. And so I went to London Business School and then learned how to do a bit of stuff there, didn't know what I wanted to do then, got hired by a company called McKinsey, had a fairly miserable time drawing lots of charts, having zero impact on companies, And then one of the clients hired me, which is the newspaper industry. So I spent 7 years on strategy work, moved across to work in one of the most strategically challenged industries in the world. And then Google was looking for somebody to run the UK who'd got experience of advertising. I'd run quite a big advertising business in the newspapers who could speak to business leaders. I'd worked in consulting in lots of different industry sectors. And, you know, so it looked like me. And that was me into Google and running Google UK initially. In those days, pre-smartphone, less than 17% of people on the planet were online. Think about that for a minute. The iPhone and smartphones launched kind of about a year later. And, you know, my job was to sort of build a business. So I went into my boss's office after 4 weeks. He said, okay, so, you know, what have you found? And I handed in this piece of paper on which I'd drawn 37 boxes. And they were 37 different teams that I figured out I needed to align to run Google in the UK, different product teams and marketing. Most of them were not in the UK. And I said, is this, you know, what you're intending? And he said, no, that's why we hired you. Go and figure that out. And that was really my job from then on, was like figure out how to work in an organization like that.
Right, and you know, redraw the 37 boxes and get them to work together and collaborate.
You might talk about that, yeah. Because the job was sort of, initially I was really struggling because I thought my job was to have them all report to me. And what I realized is, you know, actually how liberating it is when the marketing team delivers somebody who's great at marketing.
Yes.
And your job is to, you know, get all those different teams in one boat.
But like that rowboat, exactly. And get them working together, just like rowers
Ideally.
have to. There you go.
There you go.
So you had the ideal training for.
And I think the one thing that one thing that they'll be happy about me leaving for is no more kind of rowing boat analogies, which is.
There you go.
I'm very fond of. Like, are you going to talk about rowing again?
Well, obviously, as you were at Google, your leadership style evolved, no doubt. But how would you describe your leadership style?
Well, you should have asked other people, really. When I finished at Google, you know, people who've left companies, I'd been there 18 years, and so I thought quite a bit about like stepping down, but also, you know, what am I going to say when I've so much to say? And I alighted on one thing that I thought I really learned from being there, and it was early in the Google thing. You know, I just had the conversation about the boxes. I'd gone to the US to figure out the people who ran some of those different boxes. And I was lucky enough to have a conversation with Larry Page, who's one of the two founders of Google. And unlike other tech founders you might think of, both Larry and Sergey are quite shy and introverted and quite quiet sort of people. And I sort of talked to Larry a bit about what I'd found. And the UK was the biggest country for Google in terms of this business outside of the US for most of the time I was there, actually. And he said, your job is to put the best people on the most important work and get out of the way. Mm-hmm. And actually that's what I learned to do. And it sounds easy, doesn't it? But who are the best people? And so for me, that was often that sort of cross-functional, multiple domain expertise people. What is the most important work? There's a good job for managers and leaders. Defining the priorities. When you're building technology, it can change the world, it can work for billions of people. Like, what is the most important work? And then getting out of the way doesn't actually mean you're hired, go and figure it out. It's finding the right ways to kind of create the space for teams and people to grow and have an impact through things like giving the right level of accountability, challenge, championing, the culture that you can try to sort of create and so on. And I genuinely think that was something I had to learn to do from the early days where the instincts were to control and wanting to control things to, you know, I ended up running a $100 billion business with people in over 40 different countries responsible for I don't know how many countries with multiple different products and regulatory issues and you know, the breakthrough of AI, so really complex stuff. And there's no way you can run that by sort of micromanaging. So yeah, I kind of learned that, but it took me 18 years.
Well, there you go. But you obviously oversaw quite a bit of growth at Google, and Google changed. I mean, obviously Google's emerged as one of the driving forces on the planet that has shaped modern business. It's this hugely iconic and vast organization, and it has enormous power. And when you're a leader in that organization, how do you deal with that? I mean, what does it do to how you interact with other stakeholders, your sense of self of greater responsibility. How do you cope with that?
Well, when I started in 2007, Google was on the business side. I could sort of call any CEO. They'd be like, "Google's interesting, it's hot," right? But they had no idea really what, unless they were working in the digital world, no idea really that it was more than a search engine. So I would go and see people and say, "Do you mind if I come and see you? I'd love to talk about what's happening online and your business." And it was very sort of friendly. Over time, the sort of disruptions, I think, then led to kind of concerns and skepticism, particularly, the marketing industry, because we were disrupting advertising and we were disrupting media in particular. So even though I come from newspapers, the newspaper industry is pretty tough on Google. It's largely owned by old men who are extremely powerful, and that power has been slipping away, reader by reader, advertising dollar by advertising dollar for the best part of a century, but it's been accelerated sort of in recent times. So we had some pretty tough foes, and I think one of the things that you realize early when you're in a company environment, particularly in a company which has a brand that's well known, is that it's not you that shows up. It's the perception of the brand. Yeah. And so actually, that's sometimes good, like, wow, Google, I love it, it's amazing. But also sometimes you're showing up and the friggin' Death Star is behind you because people see, this company is coming to kill us. And I don't, he seems like a nice guy, but actually, do I believe that? And one of the things that I had to work really hard to establish across all of the sort of the region in EMEA was that we're not a company where the people on the ground have no power. Actually, the people on the ground, the people running the UK or Sweden or South Africa or Spain actually can make things happen, and they do represent the company. And that was something that was quite different from some of the other big tech players that I could mention. So when we had problems, and we had problems all the time, so about 10 years ago, we had an issue with the use of video to radicalize people. Mm-hmm. That was obviously a problem across the internet, but we were running YouTube, and so it was a pretty big place. And that was run by our friends in the newspapers as sort of front page news, like Google's a terrorist friend, and this sort of stuff. And one of the things that was happening was sometimes advertisers' ads were showing up against some of these videos. And I was able to go out the next day and say, "We're sorry, we've messed up, you should expect better from us, and we are going to fix this with your help." And when that's happened to other companies, they weren't saying anything at all because the frontline people were not empowered to say anything until headquarters had done it. And I felt that was one of the things that I enjoyed most at Google was, I felt, and you may disagree depending on your where your seat is, that it's a company with good values that was trying to do the right thing and would listen to people like me in the front line of what was going on. And
allowed you to speak up and do things too.
And argue for what's right. And obviously that becomes easier as you're more sort of senior and responsible for more. But I think wanting to do right and wanting to listen. And one of the reasons I liked Google was I felt like the company should be like the search engine, which is, if you can't spell, if you can't type, it's our problem, not your problem. Right? And if you don't know what the language is, we'll flip the language for you. We want to make it as easy as possible to you. And what we need to do as a company, an organization of people, is like the search engine, be really good at trying to understand what it is you're trying to do our best to get you the best answer and results as quickly as possible. And if we don't, to iterate and learn from that feedback. And I tried to sort of make that part of the culture we were trying to create here.
Yes, although I still find it, some of these autocorrect spelling things still come back to haunt me because, people, they don't always get it right what you're trying to ask. And some of the emails I send them and then I look and go, what? Did I really say that?
Well, I don't know what email service you're using.
But not necessarily, that's not necessarily a Google problem. But
I can help you with that.
One of the things that's very true about today, and we talked about this when we first were talking about tonight, is the pace of change is unbelievably fast, and the uncertainty is so multifaceted, right? There's a huge amount of political uncertainty, economic uncertainty, environmental uncertainty, social uncertainty, a huge amount of polarization. How do you think leaders need to cope with that? Whether, and how do you differentiate between like somebody, a small business leader from a large corporate leader? What do you think we need to do to cope with all of that change?
I think that is the most fundamental question for organisations, whether you're a government or a small business, a large business, an NGO, or a community, actually. I think we've never seen a level of uncertainty like this in our adult lives, and actually probably for longer. And you mentioned all of those things, right? So we don't know what the tariff on the thing we make is going to be next week. We don't know what the energy price is going to be. We don't know what's going to happen with climate change. But the other thing, of course, that's happening is we've got this exponential takeoff in AI.
Yeah.
And so you overlay that on top. And an exponential, obviously we know what that means, but you can't extrapolate from where AI was, a year ago to where it's going to be next year, because it really is genuinely sort of trending this direction. And right now, for the general public and for most of the managers who you'll be working with, their experience is sort of chatbots. And sort of chatbots are kind of like 1,000 Boris Johnsons, kind of convincing and entertaining, but sometimes ludicrously wrong. And that's not what AI is. AI is like 10 years old plus, machine learning capability, and it's good at spotting patterns, making predictions, and learning. So you're absolutely right to point to autocomplete. One of the first uses of some sort of machine learning was that. And I remember Eric Schmidt became our CEO, and I remember we were in a cab going to meetings somewhere in Europe, and he was saying to me, I'm really excited because we've just trained our machine learning on YouTube, and it's identified a cat. And I was like, okay, this is why he's the CEO, because I think that sounds very trivial, but he thinks that's really, really interesting. And it's because up until that point, to train a computer what a cat was, you'd have to go, this is a cat, this is not a cat. This is another cat, this is another not cat. So you'd train it like that. Or you'd sort of say, right, here are the rules for cat, ears, milk, whatever. And this had learned what cats were just by observation of all of the content sort of on YouTube. So that was sort of the beginning. So I think, it's a long way of saying, we're in this absolutely massively uncertain time. What does it mean for leaders? I think some really fundamental differences, actually. I think, first, it means having clarity on what's long-term important and being able to articulate that in a simple way when there's so much swirl around. I think it means being able to innovate and adapt more quickly. And that means getting a breakdown. So the old way was, let's screw the costs to the floor. You're in your silos. Distribution, you hit your numbers. Marketing, you hit your numbers. Sales, you hit your numbers, etc. Retail, whatever. So expert silos, tightly managed by an alpha male boss who's going, right, follow my plan, and you're fired if you miss your number. Where we are today is you need those silos to collaborate.
Yes.
You need to break down the walls between them, because what you want to do to delight your customers is changing across all of them really, really quickly, and the data needs to flow backwards and forwards. But it's quite hard if you've been telling people for 20 years, you're fired if you miss your numbers, and you suddenly say, start collaborating, please. Really hard.
But you did that when you first got to Google. You got the 37 boxes working together. So how do you do that? How do you get these people
So
to
I think there are some lessons from tech in there, and I think one of the lessons is about innovation. So innovation, is, I think Matt Ridley, the author, said this, is basically ideas having sex. So it's about like cross-fertilizing from different areas, different things. And so you want to have a culture where that can happen. And quite often that's about domain expertise. So there's famous cases where, people started putting difficult engineering problems out online and saying, anybody help us solve this? And they were often solved by people from totally different, be a fluid dynamics problem solved by a software engineer. And in fact, colleagues at Google, just before I left, the DeepMind team won the Nobel Prize in chemistry using machine learning to discover the 3D structures of all the known proteins. So I think, you need to have that environment where different disciplines are respected and can work together. Go back to what Larry told me, a very clear goal. Larry was always frustrated that he said, if only there were people working on the world's toughest problems in a concerted way. But there aren't, he's always looking at stuff and going, why is nobody working on this or that or the other? And so I think that sort of point on what's the important work, how do I get the best people, and how do I get out of the way to drive that pace of innovation?
And with clarity.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think the other part of your question gets towards, and we can explore further what you need from leaders. But I'm also really exercised by what does that mean for careers? So I think, my two boys are 25 and 24. They've just come out of university having been impacted by COVID. Like, what do you do how do you think about the career? And I quite often get this question from parents, whatever age your kids are, like, what should we be thinking about doing here? I think it's really difficult. It's as though, I remember in COVID we were saying, oh, it's a bit like we're all at sea, but some of us have got bigger boats than others. I think it's like being all at sea in a storm, and the stuff you reach out for that you hope is going to give you buoyancy, like your education or like government, isn't working anymore. And, you know, can I believe those facts over there? You swim towards the facts and they all sink because they're not factual. Can I believe science anymore when you've got an administration like the one in the US? You know, so I think it's a really, really tough environment. And I go back to, you know, what do we need to train people for when we don't know what the future holds? And I'm doing some work on education at the moment, and this really exercises me. And it's not meant to be sort of offensive to the teaching industry, but like, we're teaching our children the same stuff and in the same way as their great-grandparents. Like, this can't be right.
Yeah.
In a world where I've got all the world's information on my phone, and actually within a few years I'm going to have, you know, all the world's intelligence on my phone. What do you need to teach people? Adaptability, curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, all of those things that Ken
Emotional
Roberts...
intelligence,
Yes,
the
exactly.
importance of judgment.
Exactly.
But one of the things that, you know, you'll relate to as the father of a couple of boys in the Gen Z generation. As we've discussed, I was recently talking to a reporter who said so many people are complaining about Gen Z, and we've got 4, some people say 5 generations, even 6 generations in the workplace because people are working longer as well. So how do we deal with the different expectations of different generations, and do you buy this Gen Z or entitled and difficult narrative?
I think it's a very dangerous and patronizing narrative. I understand why it's useful to think about, you know, groups of people having particular characteristics and stereotypes, and you know, we do that as humans all the time, of course. But like, if you think about Gen Z, take a boy out of the American company. There are probably sort of 4 or 5 cohorts within that. So when I was growing up, and I'm looking at some of the people in the room here, you know, we went from, in my sort of youth, having 3 TV channels to having 4 and then maybe 5. That was how media changed across 20 years. If you look at the last 10 years, you know, my kids are Gen Z, but they are pre-TikTok, right? So they didn't grow up with TikTok kind of being mainlined into their brains. And their first smartphone was a BlackBerry because it had the BBM before WhatsApp took off, so costless messaging. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people whose schooling has been affected by COVID, who've had TikTok mainlined into them by the Chinese Communist Party. It's very different then. So thing one is it's not a coherent group. And thing two, I just don't buy the attitude. I think it's a failure of management if you're not able to engage different people in different ways. And so, yeah, I think, well, it's one of the most important things that you do is the role of managers in a world of uncertainty is really, really important. So as a leader, you've got to articulate with clarity, you've got to try to create the culture, but the manager has to do that every day as well. And that's about getting the best out of people. And the manager's the place where you can de-average, right? If I'm running a company with 40,000 people, I've got to average across them to understand things that are going on. But as a manager, you're managing a unit where you can personalize everything.
Yeah, and one of the things we advocate when you have multi-generational workforces is actually getting back to this, let's collaborate, let's learn from each other. You have different definitions of well-being. You have different habits of how you like to work. So instead of judging, why don't you just listen to why that is and learn from each other, right?
And multi-generational is great because it's one of the dimensions of diversity that we don't typically talk about a great deal. But, you know, we all know now, hopefully, that it's quite a good idea to have teams that have men and women on them, and ideally in a representative way. We've started to get better at ethnic groups, less so at socioeconomic dynamics. But one of the great potentials of AI, by the way, is it lifts those with the least by the most. So, you know, I was responsible for Google in Africa and so on. But if you think about it today, somebody with no formal education can draft a document as well as you and I. Somebody with no language training can translate things pretty accurately, with an accuracy level that's higher than, you know, translators, you know, 10 years ago. So actually there's a real opportunity here, I think, to be much more inclusive, and the raw smarts you've got are going to be more important than your ability sort of to pass some of the technical exams that are around. So that is one of the challenges for education, of course.
Absolutely, and of course, a lot of that is the ability to use your human judgment and emotional intelligence to figure out what are the problems you should be working to solve. And one of the things that I know that Google did ages ago is studied, what makes a good manager. I think you called it Project Oxygen, I think it was called. And the 8 characteristics of a good manager, properly analyzed and using lots of data. Number 1 was being a good coach, and number 8 was technical competence. And yet and that was a long time ago, but just last year, CMI did a piece of research that showed that 82% of people are still promoted into management on the basis of technical competence. And then they're not given any management training. So how do we overcome this? How do we get people to recognize the importance of management and leadership? Do you think enough credence is given to that in things like government policy, or even in British firms where...
No, it's a big opportunity, let's put it that way, I think. So the Oxygen research at Google is classic, engineering. So one of the great things and the terrible things about working in tech is like, get the data. We used to say, like, in God we trust, everyone else must bring data. And so very good question to ask, like, show us the data about what teams think a good manager is. And that was really helpful. But then having 8 things that I can't remember isn't very helpful. So turning that data into actionable change. One of the most powerful things that came out of the work, though, was this sort of concept that's become known as psychological safety. So people want an environment that's safe. And I do think that's part of what leaders and managers of tomorrow need, because if you want to encourage collaboration, if you want to encourage experimentation, then people need to feel that it's safe to do something that doesn't work, or to spend time on something that might not work out. And I think that's going to be a key differentiator, actually, is the ability to create a culture where people feel safe. They've got to be clear on what's being asked of them, but not everything important can be measured, and not everything that you can measure is important, and that's always one of the challenges.
And actually, one of the other things that we find is that in addition to creating psychological safety is praising people, right? So that's free, right? Saying thank you, it's free, right? Not just pointing out when you've messed up, but saying, hey, well done, good for you. And do you think we do that enough? Do you think we celebrate success enough, perhaps particularly in this country, but just generally, do you think managers and leaders are good at doing that?
I don't have the data to answer that well, but I think, so I'll tell you a couple of inside sort of things about the Google world. So firstly, that work was done, as you say, a long time ago. I think absolutely the case that in our sort of engineering, product and research teams, management capability, general management capability, still not hugely valued. Still very, very skewed to technical excellence. It took a long time even to get management capabilities to be included in performance appraisals, which I think is problematic. Another thing we had was a practice of self-nomination for promotion. Now, can you guess what kinds of people self-nominate at a high rate and what kinds of people self-nominate at a low rate? And then imagine what that's like in an environment where the proportion of women is fewer than 30%. So, guess what? You don't get any women rising up the
So let me guess,
stack.
the men were much more likely to nominate themselves for promotion than the women.
Surprising. But also I don't think it takes much to change those things. We just changed the process away from self-nomination. We just made people aware that some of these unconscious biases might be there. And you're all doing the same, I'm sure, in your organisations. But to your other point, culturally, I think one of the things I do find is, we were just saying in the chat beforehand, in Britain, I think that the media and political view of business isn't that positive. And, I think if you look at, I don't want to criticise any individuals, but if you look at governments in the last 10 years, how many people have come from a genuine business background versus financial? There's nothing wrong with being in finance, but it's not the same as running organisations full of people. It's about betting, and that's a different sort of discipline. So I think, and then the same in the media. I'm constant. I did lots of media interviews in lots of countries over many years, and worked with lots of media organisations about their digital transformation. I was always stunned at how little the journalists knew about their business, not just business, but their business. And say to them, what are the economics of your business? How big's the partnership with Google worth, or whatever? They would have absolutely sort of limited ideas. So I think there's something about business and its positive role, employing people, I've met business owners, large and small, biggest companies in the world, most interesting startups in the world. Hardly ever, not always, hardly ever have I come across somebody I thought this person is trying to avoid taxes, nickel and dime their customers, screw their staff to the floor. Mostly the people I've met are trying to do a good job and create a good company, but you wouldn't think that from the coverage sometimes, and I think that's a bit of a problem.
It is, and indeed, the perceptions, I think, of business are a very big problem. But going back to something you said earlier about the rise of AI, the huge rise of AI, and some of the things that maybe people entering the workforce did. For example, a very senior McKinsey leader was saying, you know what? The bright young thing. So when you went to McKinsey and you said, I did lots of meaningless charts that had no impact on the companies, but you did that and you learned from it. Yes. Now, a lot of that's being done by AI.
Yeah.
So how do you think the workplace is going to be changed, and what kind of principles do you think managers and leaders need to adapt and adopt to get the most, going back to your point, to let AI give to people who have the least, give them the most, but also to really be a force for good?
Yeah, look, I think it's easy that the headlines about AI write themselves, literally. Thank you. So it's very easy to say, like, AI is going to take out all these jobs, and it's going to render middle management, middle class people kind of completely redundant, watch out. Well, let's actually look for some facts. So I think actually what we're seeing so far is that there are areas where you can see AI transformation taking off. Actually, marketing is one of them, creative development, multivariate testing. It's actually got quite a lot of traction, and you will see, jobs change and go away. But there aren't that many examples yet where you can really see meaningful impact. It's a bit like, where's the productivity impact from the IT sector? It's not so easy to see. So I think, what you have to think about is, how do we embrace this stuff and learn about it? And I think the same is true whether you're thinking about safety or AI in health or AI in sort of kind of office type jobs. And the three things I've been saying to organizations in the last few years are dance, play, and sing. So the first thing is, you've got to have your data ready to dance. And that doesn't mean to say you've got to put it all in one massive data lake and have Accenture spend billions doing it. What it means is, understand the data you've got that could be really valuable, and kind of getting in a place where it can be used GDPR safe and so on and so forth. The second thing is, whether it's frontline assembly workers, nurses, teachers, expert clinicians, what you find is that almost everybody's a bit skeptical about AI and a bit concerned. Is it going to make me feel stupid? Is it going to take away my job? Is it really relevant? Mm-hmm. And all the work that we did while I was at Google showed that a couple of hours training could take people from, I'm not sure about this, to, oh, okay. And then, of course, they find that it can work quite well, and you also find where the pitfalls are. So that second thing of play, giving everyone the chance to play, so it's no longer a mystery, but it's something which is useful. The data is that, on average, older women are the lowest users of AI and younger men are the highest users, so there's an imbalance there you have to be sensitive to. But in the frontline workers case, and actually in nursing as well, we had union reps going and training the staff on the AI tools, and that was incredibly powerful. You get these sort of advocates. So yeah, I think dance, play with it, and then compete. And so on compete, most organizations, we had a spot, maybe 2 or 3 places where AI is likely to have quite a big impact and could be a real competitive advantage. So figuring out like what that might be. So I'm on the board of The Guardian at the moment, and one of the opportunities of AI is to help them put, their default story is text on their app or in their paper or on their website. What if AI can help you to create an audio format, a video format, an infographic format at speed, still with editorial input, but suddenly you can put the right story in the right place in the right format in front of the right audience member. So it's harnessing it in those ways, I think, is important. So those are very simplistic, but I think quite helpful ways of thinking about the role now.
Yeah, and it is important to play. We've seen that.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid of AI, and you can't, it's very difficult to really use something well that you're afraid of.
Yeah.
Right? As in most things.
But then it's partly the job of the tech companies to
Yeah.
make it accessible and useful. Google's mission was always organize the world's information, make it accessible and useful for everyone. I think it should be updated to organize the world's intelligence to do that. But like I was with my elderly parents, and they got some great black and white photos. So I can take a photo of the photo, upload it to Gemini and say restore and colorize. And it's magical. I mean, absolutely magical to see these photographs of your great-grandparents or whatever coming to life and looking as fresh as a day. And it really sort of changes it, like those sort of colorized First World War or whatever. It really changes things. It's a moment of delight. So things like that, they help people go, oh, okay, that's quite cool. Show me how to do that. Before you know it, my mum's using AI for sort of transcription and all sorts of things. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So then obviously having a play really helps, and then finding a use that works for you.
Yeah, and also using it helps you to see the pitfalls as well.
Yes.
Okay, you need to be careful with it here.
Yeah, well, speaking of pitfalls, I mean, obviously values and purpose remain very important, and so does culture. And how do you think values and purpose and culture need to change, and how have you, over your career, gone about doing that in ways that are successful?
Yeah. So I absolutely agree, and I think in a world of complexity and chaos, such as you outlined in your introduction, values and culture are everything. Because you're not going to give people a playbook and say, right, you know, on Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. you do this. Maybe there are some roles you can still do that in, but really in not many. But if you can say, okay, we're on the mission to organize the world's information, make it accessible and useful for everyone. And within that, you know, on my team, we're trying to do these things, and we want to do it in a way which is focusing on the user first and lives it true to our values. Actually, people can navigate quite well with that mixture of things, but the systems around them need to reinforce that. As I was saying earlier, if you suddenly tell people you're going to be fired if you miss your numbers, start collaborating and experimenting, it ain't going to work. So the systems need to change with it. But I think that's why, you know, the next for me, one of the things I want to spend time on is the next generation of leaders and managers, and those people, those Gen Z folk that we mentioned, helping them to, you know, have fulfilling lives and careers. That's the job that we should all be, well, certainly people at my age should be focused on, I think.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, a very important point. And you mentioned the importance of psychological safety, experimentation. So what's your attitude towards failure, and what would you consider, you know, would you share with us your biggest failure and what you learned from it?
I always find this amusing because and maybe it's my sport, but I really believe in you win or you learn. And also I think there's a mantra which is like fail fast, it's like the tech thing. I think that's really terrible, because you shouldn't be focusing on failing, you should be focusing on experimenting and changing your mindset towards let's experiment. Some things are going to go well, some things are going to go badly. The stuff that goes badly is going to tell us something just as much as the stuff that goes well. And actually, I think in sport, you know, I learned more from losing than I did from winning. Right? If I won consistently all the time, I wasn't really quite sure what it was that I was doing. But if I lost, I could analyze and go, hang on a minute, I probably need to get stronger or whatever. So I think I would shy away from that sort of failures thing. So of course, you know, I've got loads wrong. In sport, I've lost races I should have won. In business, I've made the wrong appointments. I've focused on the wrong stuff at the wrong time. All of the above. I don't think anything kind of devastating. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, well, you know, there's this one deal, it got away. But so I think you make lots of, if you're doing it right, I think you make lots of mistakes and get lots of things wrong sort of all the time. But it should never be a bet the farm thing.
No.
So that's how
And
I
do you
hope.
feel as a leader, when you get stuff wrong, you say, oops, sorry, got that wrong? And
Oh yeah, I really believe in that. And I'm not sure, I think I started doing that quite early in my career, which maybe curtailed my McKinsey career, I don't know. Because they didn't like to admit they were wrong about anything. But yeah, I think it really helps. Like I said, when I got up on stage at an event where this story about violent extremism had landed the previous day and said, look, we're sorry, I could look people in the eyes and genuinely say that from not just me, but from the CEO I'd spoken to the night before. I think that really matters. And in today's world of uncertainty, we're going to get more wrong.
yeah.
And so that sort of, I go back to your point on leader. If you want to create an environment of trust, you need to start by being vulnerable.
Yep.
So you have to start off with I remember doing this in COVID, and it really stuck with me. I use it all the time now. I would start briefings. We do a whole kind of briefings across the world or whatever. Okay, this is what we know, and this is what we don't know. And just be really, really clear about that. And what we don't know, it's fine that we don't know it. Some of that stuff we're going to try and figure out how, it goes over time. And I think you saw that with political leaders, those who, I don't know, Angela Merkel, for all she's been criticised subsequently as a scientist, she took that sort of approach.
Yes.
And I think that brought people together, and others were sort of overconfident in their what they thought they knew.
Yes.
And as we're now seeing in the COVID inquiry here, of course, it's completely fine for people to not to know. The public doesn't expect people to have got everything right. They just expect you to be straight with them. So I think that's vital.
And tell them the truth. And that, obviously, political leaders today don't always do that, do they?
Yeah.
But you said one of the important things you want to do now is focus on helping younger people with their careers. And you think that all of us as business leaders should be helping those future generations to have successful lives and careers. So what would be that one piece of advice for all of those people, those future leaders listening to you tonight, that you would like to give them as to how best to do that?
Gosh, I don't know about one thing. I think something that's on my mind that, in a world of technology and automation and change, the best thing you can do is be more human. And what does that mean? That is, as you said, sort of the empathy, the interpersonal, the critical thinking, the curiosity, the communication, the collaboration. It all begins with C, doesn't it? But I think those skills are really, really important. And so LinkedIn's become a thing, hasn't it? I was told by my team, you've got to sort of post on LinkedIn because it's better, and actually you get large audiences and so on. But I did a thing which was about Project U. So I realised, so I'd spent a couple of years thinking about, if I'm going to step down, what will I do? And I went to see lots of people who were a step ahead of me and was asking them what they did and how did they think about it. I found it incredibly useful. And then once I announced I was stepping down, I had quite a long sort of taper to hand over things. And so I had lots of career chats with people. I was also having career chats with my two boys who were both starting in the world of work then. So it was from the CEOs of the world's biggest companies and politicians through to kind of kids graduating. And I found my advice was basically the same, which was go and have a chat with somebody. And, ideally somebody a step ahead of you. And if you're in work, by the way, it's not enough to do that once and think you're going to solve it. You need to create a project, just like you have projects at work. So I say, make a project and spend a couple of hours minimum each week on who is it I want to talk to, reaching out to them, talking to them, and then following up. And don't go and say, Anne, I need a job. Go and say, Anne, how would you look about somebody like me? Here's where I am. Here's what I'm doing. Any advice? And Anne will usually say, well, occurs to me this. By the way, go and have a word with Sophie, because she had somebody just like you. And so almost all of those conversations lead to something else. I think that's probably my best advice for everybody. And I think it's partly because of the uncertainty we're in that nobody knows. And so one of the most helpful things is to get human advice for other people.
And that is a great example of being human, and and because obviously we humans do chat to each other in ways that maybe the AI can't quite do yet.
Yes, but more than that, I think we humans are mostly wired to be helpful.
Yes.
And so when you start reaching out to people and saying, would you mind having a chat, it can be quite intimidating, particularly if you're starting out in your career. And the worst that can happen is people will say, I'm sorry, I haven't got time. But actually what you find is that people are quite generous and they remember being you. And so they want to help. And I think that's one of the greatest things. And that also then gives you a human connection, because you've done that once and it's made a difference.
And you're quite right. I think most people, not all people, do want to help other people. Yeah. And thank you for helping us tonight with all of your insights. I want to give time for questions. I'm going to start with the audience first. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll give you a mic and you can ask it. Questions. I see one in the front row. Patrick.
Thanks, Matt.
Hello.
Matt, one of the most exciting bits of your job, I guess, was Africa the last while. And with the demographics the way they are, 1 in 4 of us will be African. I'm interested to think as well, what do you think of most corporates' strategy towards Africa? Have they got one? What's the sort of emerging strategy?
I don't know enough to answer that question. What I perceive when I talk to leaders in Africa is that Europe has turned its back on Africa, and the US has turned its back on Africa, and that the pandemic proved that, but also the people who have stepped into the fray are the Chinese. And I've got nothing against the Chinese. I wish that we were as strategic and long-term in our thinking as the Chinese were. So I think there's a challenge and a problem there. The other things I see when I go there, so I had my last trip to visit 3 countries was in December. I went, amongst other places, to Nigeria. And like Nigeria is going to be the 3rd most populous country on the planet by 2050. The average age of the population is 24, am I right on that? Anybody can help? And it's going down. It's like unbelievable. But what had changed in my 10 years being responsible for Google in Africa was over half of the people in Nigeria connected in some way. And you see the same amount of entrepreneurialism, but with the incredible sort of youthful energy coming out of there. And we went to meet the government. And when I'd gone previously, I'd gone on my own with my white, Nigerian colleague, white country manager, not Nigerian. And this time I went with 7 Nigerians, and they're the team. And in the room was the technology minister. And he opened the meeting by saying to the president, this is the team from Google, and I need to say a thank you to them because they gave me a grant 10 years ago to start the first tech hub here in Nigeria, and now I'm the minister responsible for sort of technology. And so that pace of change, and also the other thing I think I see there is, as I said, the people with least can benefit from the technology the most. When you connect people and they have access to information and the entrepreneurism, it's unbelievable. Now, there are lots of challenges around things like Nigerian education systems, very decentralized, so you can't, and different countries have got their challenges. What we were trying to do at Google was infrastructure investment. The biggest thing we can do for people in Africa is give them access. Infrastructure investment and then lowering the cost. So if you've got an Apple phone, that's completely out of the price range, but Android, which is an open operating system, means you can buy a $30 phone, and then it's about the data costs, so trying to get those down as they've done in India. So I think hugely exciting, and I think when people get access, then they really can take off. So I'm excited by that.
Great. Other questions? Sandra and Mitali.
Thank you so much. And it sounds like you are a huge optimist.
Yeah.
Yeah, practical.
But
a lot of optimism coming through. But perhaps more personally, when you look at your sons and the life in front of them, and you fast forward 20 years, do you feel they will have a better life than you've had?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? That's one of the big reasons that we've got the world we have today is that since 2008, on average in developed countries, people's lives have got worse, and that seems to have breached the contract that we'd all sort of grown up with. So I want to talk about my sons particularly. They'll be fine because they're coming from an affluent background. As my youngest son said to me when he was trying to get some money out of me one day, you know that Pulp song, Dad? I said, what? I said, that Pulp song, if you asked your dad, he could end it all. Common People. Anyone know that one? She came from Greece. She's like, look, if I got into real trouble, you would come and help me, wouldn't you? And so I think, we shouldn't worry about the children of kind of affluent kind of families, but we should be worrying about the fact that the system's failing to give people a better future. And in Europe, we can't afford it. And that's one of the challenges, I think, for government. I really sympathise with government, but I think we've got like A-list problems and sort of D-list government capabilities. And so the government here, no worse than the governments anywhere else, right? To transform government is the same as transforming business. So they need to transform how citizens interact with government, and that means all the different government departments. So I talked to one government about infrastructure investment. So how do we get state-of-the-art infrastructure for AI and technology as quickly as possible? Well, you need data centers, you need energy, you need changes to planning regulation, you need telcos to invest, you need tech companies to commit and support. So it would make sense, wouldn't it, to get all those people together and work with government and say, right, how do we come up with an accelerated plan? Okay, great. So you need, in the UK, you'd need the Cabinet Office, the Treasury, DCIT, DESNES, what else? Environment, energy, all to work together. So how do you do that? Well, the Prime Minister could do that. Okay, well, he's quite busy. So, that just illustrates, the same applies in corporates. We've got a big job, I think, to change as fast as the world around us. And I think that's the answer to how organizations need to change. And then, for me, the generational challenge is giving people the skills and the confidence to make their way in the world.
And that the silos, between the departments still very much exist in governments, and they don't. The 37 boxes still don't collaborate together, and so it's more difficult to get stuff done.
Exactly, and then you've got things like the problem of education, which is we're teaching people all the wrong stuff in all the wrong ways. But that's why I think things like being able to learn from an app. One of my sons, who's wonderfully distractible, let's put it that way. The night before his physics GCSE, I said, "What are you doing, Fred?" And he said, "I'm learning Russian from Duolingo." Like, great, but terrible at the same time.
Mitali.
So, Google has one of the, it's one of the hardest places to get into. It's a very talented workforce. So I was really intrigued when you said, find the great people, put them in the roles. And I guess, what are the attributes or the skills that you've seen that are quite exceptional, above and beyond that have made the best people that have worked for you, at that level? I'm kind of interested in what your thoughts are on that.
Gosh, it's a great question, isn't it? I think makes me think of a few things. Well, firstly, there are a few people who are just off the charts that I've had the privilege to work with. I mentioned, the founders. Demis Hassabis is another one. I worked closely with him, particularly recently. Like, they're just just like genius, Nobel sort of level people, and there are few of them, but we need to nurture them and Demis. I just think is a super exceptional individual. He can see the power of AI to transform things for the good, whether it's in health or in energy. Working on things like nuclear fusion. If you could crack that, you're immediately into a world of kind of clean, very, very low-cost energy for everyone. Like, think about these things. So having people like that working on the best stuff is amazing. I think, though, the characteristics that I found most compelling are the ones we've talked about, those human characteristics, the problem-solving ability, collaboration. I know you're a tech person as well. I think, yes, of course, technical skills matter, but it's the ability to collaborate, to innovate, that makes a difference. And I was always looking for people who were team players. I think every organization can be polluted by, the lemon person who behaves badly, the poo in the pool, I think some people call it, right? And so I think you can't tolerate that sort of thing. Something else I was going to say in regard to this. I think the other thing is, something that I believe in powerfully is, for managers, is you should be lifting yourself and others. So I think the job of a manager is to help the team be their best, individually and collectively. And to do that, you also have to develop yourself. So you need people who will tell you and give you feedback when you're being an idiot or when you're missing something. And that's quite difficult. And actually, the more senior you get, the fewer people dare to tell you that, which isn't great as well. So I think that sort of idea of the job of a manager is to get the best out of each person and the team collectively. And I read lots of literature about management and organizations and teams, and there's lots of great stuff out there, but I find it too complicated. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think little things that I've sort of talked about here are the things that have worked for me. Maybe I should tell you my final rowing story. So I realized that I learned that there's more that I learned from sport than I learned in academia that helped me every day at work. And partly it's that sort of vision and collaborating together. But one of my early sporting experiences, was being in a boat. And in rowing, you just have to repeat the same motion, perfectly. That's what you're trying to do. Anyway, I'm rowing along, and there's a guy coaching us with a megaphone in a sort of motorboat next to the boat. And he yells out, "Hey, Matt, there's a piece of shit on the end of your oar." And I looked down at the end of the oar, and it looked clean. I couldn't see anything on it. I looked at him really puzzled, and he went, "No, the other end." And I went, "Oh." And it was his little gag, but it made me think, one of the most important jobs when you're in a team is to take responsibility for your own shit. And so sometimes you're the person who's polluting what's going on. And for example, that also applies to organizational teams. So it might be, spending your time in sales blaming the marketing team for not providing with enough leads, when actually what you should be doing is getting better at selling. The marketing people should be worrying about the leads. So I think that sort of sense of individual responsibility as well as collective, whatever the scale, whether it's, your team of 4 people or your marketing department of 400, I think really matters. So lifting yourself and others and taking responsibility for yourself first rather than pointing the finger, those 2 things have really stuck with me. And if you remember nothing of this evening, I guarantee you'll remember the piece of shit story.
Absolutely, but having a no blame culture is very, very important, I think, for lifting yourself.
No blame, but take responsibility when you get it wrong.
Absolutely, and don't blame the other people.
Yes.
Say, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
Other questions? Maybe there's one online, if not in the room. There's one just back there. And then, Michael, you probably have some online, so I'll ask you to take one from online.
Hi.
So, tonight we've spoken a lot about future leaders, and we've also spoken about the generational difference between leaders. Yeah. What we also speak a lot about is how we manage the up-and-coming future leaders to empower them. What we don't speak about is the future leaders, how they manage upwards.
Yeah.
How do they manage a generation above? How do they empower themselves to be a leader? So a manager in my own capacity who manages people who are older than me, what would your advice be for me to excel in that?
That's a great question. And I think that I heard 2 bits of it, and so apologies if I'm wrong. One is managing upwards, and the other is managing people who are older than you. And I think if I take the second one first, I think it's a bit simpler. At some point, you start managing people where you can't do their job as well as them. And it doesn't mean to say that all older people can do every job better, but you get to that point where you go from being the technical specialist manager to suddenly, like I was managing people, I had no idea how to do their jobs. So there's an element of like, how do you learn the general management skills of, I can sit down with you, I can listen to what you've got going on, and I can help you prioritize, collaborate, and do all those other things. I might not be able to help you solve this bit of coding. So that's one thing, and I think the older people thing is part of that, managing with respect for their knowledge. And everybody brings stuff that you don't know, even if they're much younger. Quite often I was learning from the younger folk. The second bit about managing upwards I think is really interesting. And I don't think I was ever that good at it. I have one insight that I learned that I can share, which is a coach, we did a little bit of team coaching, which I found really helpful. Individual coaching good, but team coaching really good. And the guy said to me, I said, I think I struggle with managing upwards. I don't quite know how to do it. I look confident the whole time, so people feel like I'm not quite sure, how to help Matt, and that doesn't feel good. And he said, well, who on your team gets the best out of you? And I went, well, I think it's probably Peter. He said, well, why does he do that? I said, actually, every time we have a one-to-one, he usually brings me something he's struggling with. And at the end of it, I feel like I've helped him. I was like, yeah, okay. So what are you going to do now? I was like, okay, I get it. So there's something you can learn about managing upwards by looking at how you interact with your team. I think there's a structural problem as well, though, which is that the people running the large organizations today, on average, grew up in yesterday's world. And they're being appointed, on average, by the people who grew up in the day before yesterday's world. So these are the people who had the alpha, follow my way or the highway, manage your silo well experience. And it's quite hard to pivot from that towards what we need now, which is a more agile, collaborative, dare I say it, female kind of skill set around some of the things we've talked about with culture and clarity and so on. So I think that can be quite difficult. And then, the very most senior people, so I'm talking about chairs now, but chairmen generally, are appointing people not based on sort of modern kind of approaches to assessing capability. They're, rather old school. So I think that's one of the challenges in sort of those levels. And so how you can help those people, reverse mentoring. I remember Julie Sweet at Accenture talking about how she was working with her management team in the very early days of AI. They were doing like 2-hour sessions where people would come in, show them stuff, get them to play with it, and everybody was doing that, and that role modeled for everyone. So I think some of those approaches, I don't have the perfect answer, but it's a really good question, one we often skip, actually, in these things, so thank you.
Good bit of advice there. Mike, is there a question from somebody online?
I have an online question, and it's from Elvendry, and the question is, was there anything in your early career that helped define the path that you would take in terms of your career long term?
Gosh, that's a great question. Well, I won't go with the obvious sporting answer. I think Experimentation, actually. So I mentioned, I started in real estate, then I went to business school, then I did consulting. But when I got into consulting, lots of people around me seem to know I want to be in telecoms and I want to do finance and I want to do marketing, and I had no idea. So what I thought I would do is use it as an opportunity to sort of figure out by trying as many different things as possible what I wanted to do. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do a project on financial services, mergers and acquisitions. I think I'm not going to like it, but let me figure out whether that's the case. And actually, I quite like the M&A bit because I learned quite a lot. I didn't like the financial services bit, but then I go, okay, let me do something in something else. So I think that sort of spirit of experimentation in consulting, where you're doing projects, in that case, every 3 to 6 months sort of thing, really helped me to figure out more about what did I enjoy, that whole Ichigai thing, is it? What do I enjoy, what am I good at, what is somebody going to pay me for? I felt that experimentation approach really helped, and I really encourage that. Not trying to fail, but trying to experiment to see what you learn.
So we have maybe time for one last question, if there's another question in the room or online. Yep, in the back there.
Thank you. So my question is, Google has acquired so many companies, and we know culture shock is a major problem. So how do you manage culture shock in an organization?
Yeah, really good question, sort of acquisition. So one of the advantages of being a massive tech company is you're not really allowed to acquire a great deal anymore. But actually, and Google did a couple of big acquisitions, probably YouTube. In 2006, it wasn't very big. It was 2 massive lawsuits, actually, but that's a different story. Doesn't have a history of doing very big acquisitions, but did lots of very small acquisitions that would be quite often talent. There's some people working on something really interesting here. We could put them in this project to do this stuff. So quite a lot of it was that. I think on the engineering side, there's often a good fit because it's very sort of about the science and the kind of quality of people you work with. I remember at a very early meeting at Google, like my first month, and I went into a meeting room, and there's all these people with laptops open, and I thought I was rude. I didn't realize that that's the way the whole world was going to work 20 years later. And we had this meeting, and I was trying to get like some very basic thing done. And at some point I said, look, it's not rocket science. Let's just do X. It's the only time this one person looked up and then looked down again. And afterwards I sort of said to somebody, what's with that guy? And they said, oh, well, he is a rocket scientist. And so I got to know him later, and I said, you were working at NASA. Like, why did you move to Google? And he said, well, because the people who wrote the textbooks on computer science that I learned from were working at Google. And so I joined because I wanted that. So I think there's an element of the fit, which is just like we want to work with the best possible people in our sort of field. That really, really helped. But you're absolutely right to point to sort of culture. And because the founders were like that, they were engineers wanting to solve problems. That's such a strong part of the culture. I think it's really helped to attract and retain people. So you build something at Google, it can reach billions of people. And there's something in that, ability to kind of reach people at scale that's really valuable for people who want to change people's lives for the better through technology. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt, for sharing your wisdom with us. I think that there's lots of very practical, actionable, and simple advice. And yes, maybe we'll remember the story about the ship, but I think we'll also remember your advice that the future is about being more human. And we certainly believe that at CMI. And that is very much in the spirit of the experiences you've shared with us. So enjoy the rest of your gap year.
Thank you.
Please let us thank Matt in the
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
This will be available online, so those of you online and those that signed up that weren't able to join us tonight will be able to see it. And if you enjoyed tonight, do join us. Our next session is with Greg Jackson on November the 25th. So we'll look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And please do stay for networking and drinks. If Matt's able to stay, he'll stay with us as long as he can, but please do enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.